So one thing I would say is that we definitely want to get out that pre, uh, typically probably at planting or within a few days of planting,
Now, a pre-emergent herbicide.
pre-emergence herbicide. And ideally, we're going to use multiple sites of action that are at our disposal. So anything from the group 14s, the group 15s, metribuzin, which is group 5. Because once that soybean emerges, we're limited on what we can use. So, if we wait till that soybean emerges, we're going to throw out metribuzin and throw out those PPO products such as Authority or Fierce, which are both of those, all those are valuable in controlling troublesome weeds such as amaranth or water hemp species. So,
Okay, we've got a lot of water hemp problems around the state. We've certainly seen them here. But so if we plant soybeans early, we're putting out a pre-emergent before we're planting soybeans or after we've planted them?
so it could be you could do before, whether you could till it in, um, within the day or the same day as planting, or you plant and you come back across and spray over those soybeans and hope that you get an incorporating rainfall. Which a good thing about early planting is that typically we're going to get better rain chances in April or even March compared to say mid-late May. So it is the one advantage that if you do rely on rainfall for incorporation, that later planting timing may not receive enough or any rainfall to incorporate those pre-herbicides into that weed germination zone. So.
Okay. What are some of the things that farmers should take into consideration for controlling weeds in early planted soybeans?
Yeah, of course, look at what weed spectrum you have in your field. If you have more small seeded broadleaves versus large seeded, or if you have a heavy grass pressure, that's something to consider. Of course, metribuzin would be really good on those small seeded broadleaves, but if you have large seeded, you're going to want to throw in um, maybe a group 2 or maybe the PPOs will get some of those larger seeded. So weed spectrum is a big thing. The soil type, so what rate you can use. If you have a heavier soil, you can bump up that rate or, higher organic matter. Because one thing we've seen is that uh, the higher rate of metribuzin does really good. We're looking at like anywhere from maybe 10 up to 12 ounces of metribuzin 75 DF. And so if you can bump up that rate, you can still not have to really be concerned about soybean injury, but you can still get that highest level of weed control possible, compared to maybe putting out 6 or 8 ounces of metribuzin. Um, yeah,
But after soybeans have emerged, then the
then it
whole the
gets
whole spectrum is changes.
yep. So once those soybeans emerge, then it definitely becomes a challenge if you haven't done something up to that point. Then you're looking at, and of course, if you plant the first week of April, they'll probably emerge in about anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks. Just depends on the year, of course. But if they're at that point, by that point in central Illinois, typically there may not be very many weeds up, but there could be a few. So you probably have to go out there though with a foliar herbicide such as glyphosate or glufosinate. And then if you need or burn down, you could put out a Zidua Pro to control weeds that have emerged. But the problem is once those beans emerge, you take away those other residual herbicides that will cause injury. So that's something to keep in mind.
Is there anything that farmers should consider about whether a herbicide is delayed or not?
That,
You
that
had
could,
you had mentioned a while
oh,
ago about a 14-day delay or something. What about delays in application?
so that the delayed in application, if you don't get out there when you want to, uh, then you may have to reconsider what you put out. So, say if you intended to go out at planting or within a couple of days and you get rained out, um, you may want to scout the fields and see if there's weeds that emerged since that time, then you'll have to throw in a foliar product. Or what we saw though with early planted soybean a few years ago is that delayed pre-emergence herbicide, if you push it back 10 to 14 days, it didn't offer any benefit into extending that residual deeper into the season compared to applying that pre at the timing of soybean planting.
So just because you delay it, that's not going to be carried on into the spring then.
Yeah, so I think that could be a lot of that probably has to do with in April it's typically cooler. Of course, this past April was kind of a warm April it seemed like, but generally speaking, that month of April or even March is going to be cooler than May, so those weeds really haven't hit their peak weed emergence yet, and the microbial activity really hasn't picked up, and so that's why that delayed you know, or that pre at planting probably looks just as good as that delayed pre because there's nothing that's really degrading that herbicide yet.
Right. And since water hemp comes up throughout the year, why you're going to have to address it as it comes up. You can't cheat on it to begin with.
Yeah, yeah. That's why, so what we've seen is that post timing. So we've looked at a couple different post timings. One's an early post. So we're looking at coming back about 28 days after planting and laying residual with it. And then we have another one that's about 3 to 4 inch weeds with the residual and without a residual, just to see if we get any benefit at the end of the season from including that residual with the post. And what we found is that, and then we also have all of this in a normal planting timing. So we're doing 2 different planting dates. And what we found is that the early post, uh, in the early planting soybean, it allows those weeds to break through, even though there's that residual with the post. Those water they break through a lot sooner, and they end up being dirtier in the end of the year. And that post timing, that's at 3 to 4 inch weeds, which typically is going to end up being around late May to early June, in the early planted soybean, ends up being the cleanest plots, regardless of whether you have that residual with the post. Although that residual is a nice safety net to have in case there are more flushes of weeds that come up, such as water hemp. Of course, velvet leaf is one weed you're probably going to miss because those group 15s aren't really going to touch it very well. But in the normal planted soybean timing, uh, the big advantage is you're killing off that first flush of weeds or second flush with tillage. And you come back with your pre, of course, and that post is going to be looking more like uh, second week of June, maybe third week of June to reach 4 inch weeds. And that early post, we have that one in the 2 in that timing, and it's 28 days after. And so both of those advantages, you're spraying weeds when they're really small, so they're a lot easier to kill. But I've seen in um, the later planting timing that those weeds have already started to break through that residual with the early post. So it looks like that mid post timing at about 3 to 4 inch weeds is doing better overall in both planting dates. The one advantage, the big advantage with hopefully planting early is that you get that increased soybean yield. But we hope that by planting earlier, we can get an earlier soybean canopy date. That's a big factor. And so I think one thing maybe to think about, so all this work we've done here is just on wide row or 30-inch row soybeans. Now, if you're dealing with narrow row soybeans, then you may be looking at different post timing just because you're going to canopy sooner ideally. And the problem with, I shouldn't say it, the downside of that is that it's going to start shading over weeds. So you probably want to make a post sooner in a narrow row soybean environment because you want to get good coverage of those weeds instead of extending out that post to 4 inches. So that is one difference I think we'll see compared to the 30-inch versus 15-inch, just to make sure that we're not out there spraying when weeds are being covered by soybeans and we can't properly kill them with the herbicides that we have available. So.